Welcome to the Love Lab Podcast, a safe and fun place to get real and learn about sex. Whether you're a man or woman, single or couple, this is the show for you. I am your host, Kevin Anthony, and I am here to guide you to go from good to amazing in the bedroom and your relationships. All right, welcome back to the Love Lab Podcast. This is episode 305, and it is titled How Left Brain Analytical Men Can Understand Women and Relationships. So this is going to be an interesting episode, I think, because, when Celine, my wife, was doing work with primarily men, which she did for many, many years, there was this pattern that she noticed that so many of the men coming to her that were experiencing issues with their sexuality were constantly stuck in their head, like really analytical, like heady type individuals. Now, that doesn't mean that every client she worked with was that way, but there was enough of them for us to see a pattern that, wow, okay, men who tend to be stuck in their head tend to have a lot of problems with their relationships and sexuality. And so we started noticing that pattern, and it's interesting because my guest today has also noticed that pattern, and she's going to help us sort of unpack that a little bit. And she's got personal experience both being in a very heady occupation and working with a lot of really left brain analytical men, but also had the opportunity to spend a lot of time in places like tantric communities. So she kind of bridges the gap between the two. So we're going to find out from her what her experience is. And, if you identify as one of those left brain analytical men, you might learn something here. If you are in a relationship with one of those left brain analytical men, you might also learn something valuable here. Okay, before we do that, a short pause for my sponsor, Power and Mastery 3.0. Power and Mastery 3.0 is the latest version of the popular men's sexual mastery course. If you are struggling with erectile dysfunction, premature ejaculation, or simply want to increase your skills in the bedroom, then Power and Mastery is for you. Join the exclusive club of men who have taken their sexual performance into their own hands and become sexual masters. Mastering your sexuality is a key component to becoming the man she has always dreamt of and craves. Don't leave your sexual performance up to chance or the throw of the dice. Become a sexual master today by going to powerandmastery.com and joining the exclusive club of men who have taken their destiny into their own hands. That's powerandmastery.com. Okay, my guest today is Jessica Gold. She is a former PhD chemist and now a passionate relationship coach for men and couples. Dr. Jessica has spent 4 years living in tantric communities in Asia, where she finally learned to get out of her head and have some really great sex. She helps powerful nerds in tech and finance master the art of relating to women. So welcome to the show, Dr. Jessica.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
All right, we got to start with a little bit of background here. Now, I know your bio kind of says you were a PhD chemist, but could you tell us a little bit about your background, both your education, but also the work that you did in that field?
Sure, absolutely. I was all science all the time. I was very dedicated I wanted to do primary science. I wanted to work with the primary elements of material reality, and the periodic table was where I decided to go. And I really loved working with my hands and fixing things and building things and just being a researcher in lab, because there was this sense of like wonder and curiosity that we had as scientists, and just to ask really deep questions about life and the universe and everything, and then be able to research them, even if they didn't have direct applications necessarily. It was such a fun playground. And my research was actually in using light to allow molecules to change shape so that they would interact with receptors in the brain differently. Like in one shape, the molecule would bind, and in a different shape, it wouldn't bind. So I basically had an on-off switch that I could control with wavelengths of light. And later this was used to help blind flies start to see again, for example. So that was my some of my PhD research. And then in my postdoctoral research, I was researching actually pain receptors in the brain and creating new versions of opioids to bind these. Sometimes opioid receptors, they associate with each other, so they're like bivalent receptors. I can't actually remember the words right now. It's been so long. But it was really fun because I was doing the organic synthesis of some of these new types of painkillers, and then I was testing them in cells that I grew myself. I did all the in vitro work, and then I would actually do some of the in vivo work as well in mice to test them in mouse brains. And it's really rare for a scientist to do that whole spectrum. Usually you just specialize in one of those, but I got to do the whole thing, and I loved that flexibility, and I always wanted to learn more and to follow an experiment from like an idea on paper. Okay, we need to synthesize this molecule, and then I would synthesize it and then testing it the whole way. It was really fun.
Awesome. Would you say that that is a primarily male-dominated field? I don't know if it is or not, but I'm asking.
I think it was starting to change. In my PhD, there were definitely a lot of women. Maybe there were like a third women. Although I did still feel like it was like an old boys club. I did get the impression that in order to be respected, I needed to remove any trace of femaleness from me, because what was really highly valued was working really hard, not being distracted by your body, not having emotions, just showing up the same every day and doing as many reactions as you possibly could. Uh, and my PhD advisor, he didn't have tenure yet. He wasn't a tenured professor, so he was really pushing us hard as a lab, to publish a lot. And so, I even heard him and others make fun of women for having our cycles and things like this. So it definitely was still male dominated. But when I moved into my postdoctoral research, my advisor was a woman, and I was very much more in like the cell biology, neuroscience side of things. And so actually that was more female dominated.
I'm not at all surprised to hear it's primarily male dominated. I mean, that's what we think of when we think of like hardcore science type stuff. I think it's very interesting, however, that you actually sort of in front, like out loud and in front of your face, were told that, they're laughing at women because they have their periods, or you should show up the same every single day. I have a couple of good friends of mine. They started a supplement company a few years back, and they made supplements for, basically the whole nootropic trend, right? So they have a very popular nootropic on the market right now. And when they were originally creating it and testing it, they were giving it to a lot of their friends, including my wife and myself, as sort of guinea pigs, like, hey, try this out, tell us what you think, right? So, I was taking it, I was like, okay, yeah, I mean, it is definitely increasing my sharpness and my focus, but it had way too much caffeine at the time in the early stages for me. It was like making me super jittery. Anyway, the point of this story is that when my wife took it, she was like, wow. She was like, it works, but it makes me feel sort of like a man. Like I'm just like on go mode all the time. And so we gave that feedback to them. And because basically what my wife wanted to tell them was like, could you make a formula for women, a formula that takes into account the change of our cycles and how we don't want to be in 100% go mode all the time, right?
Yeah.
And his feedback was, well, we thought of that when we were developing it, but we realized we'd have to make a different formula for every day of the month. So we scrapped it. And I tell that story just to sort of validate, what you were feeling in that moment, which is like, I can't show up as a woman exactly the same every day and work. That just doesn't work for your biology.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting you say that because I did show up the same every day and work. I just totally ignored my biology. And it is possible. However, I don't think that that's healthy for anyone, men or women. I mean, men actually have a testosterone cycle every 24 hours. So we all have ebbs and flows of our energy, and we're humans. We're biological. We're not robots. We're not steel and metal. So I, yeah, I mean, I kind of, I agree and disagree with that
Well,
statement of
it's
that women aren't supposed to. Yeah.
it's not that you can't, because yeah, you can do it if you want to, but there's a cost to that. There's a cost to denying your cycles and your biology that is most likely not going to lead to, the richest, most fulfilling, happy life as a woman, right?
Yeah, well, I think what it did was it deleted the special wisdom that women have. And it took me away from my own power, which is more awareness, more centeredness in my body, and more honoring of what is life asking for from me right now, instead of like the rigidity. Like there's a wisdom in all of that, just like the earth has seasons. You don't tell the earth that it's being a less good earth just because it has winter. Or you don't tell the sky that it's doing a terrible job of being the sky just because it is having a thunderstorm.
Yeah,
These are
absolutely.
all essential and required, and they bring a depth of wisdom that gets lost. Yeah, if you look down on it.
Absolutely. So, this is a little bit of an aside, this topic, and it actually is not on my, list of questions at all. But I kind of wanted to go there a little bit because, the title of this is, helping left brain analytical men understand women. So lesson number one for today is women are not robots, and them having cycles and fluctuating hormones is not actually a bad thing that you have to try to mitigate or try to, get them to ignore. If you can understand that that's who they are and that this is actually one of their superpowers, you can tap into those superpowers and use them to their advantage and your advantage, right?
Yes, I'm so glad we're talking about this. I'm secretly so passionate about it, but I never get to talk about it.
We're trying to help men understand women here. So, this is absolutely, right in line with what we're talking about.
Can I
Okay,
just give one tip there?
absolutely.
So actually, if you start to work in tune with the cycles, whether it's of the seasons and of nature or with your woman, then you might find that she's actually more predictable, more understandable. If you're like, oh, it's actually her spring right now, or it's her fall right now, then you can predict and decide, like, okay, what's going to work better between us? What should I do to support her? Instead of saying, she's hormonal, which is actually wrong too, because when we have the hardest time with emotions is when we have fewer hormones, levels of hormones drop. And so we're feeling like raw and tender then. It's not because we have more. Anyway, those are my two tips.
Yeah, absolutely. The reason why women seem like such an enigma to men most of the time is because they're viewing women through the lens of being a man, right? So in other words,
Yeah.
they look at a woman and they're comparing her to him, and they're like, I don't understand it. I don't get it. Why is she like this one moment and like this the next moment? Why, right? If you can learn to see it through the lens of a woman instead of through the lens of a man, it suddenly makes sense. And then you can tap into things like, oh, she's going into her moon time, a time when she's actually more in touch with her intuition than usual, right? So maybe now's a good time to ask her for her advice about something.
Exactly. Right.
Okay.
And
Oh, go ahead.
a lot of discoveries in science. So, contrary to popular belief, if you're not a scientist, you might think science is all about logic and reason, but the best scientists had strokes of insight from going on a walk or from their intuition. And there's a whole book about it called, I think it's called Serendipity, Serendipitous Discoveries in Science, and some really important ones came through this deep listening.
Yeah, well,
And yeah.
science, it was really, that's the testing of ideas, but where do the ideas come from, right?
Yep.
So, yeah, the ideas usually come from inspiration, and inspiration happens in all kinds of interesting ways.
Yeah, like when you're playing or when you're outside in nature, when you're not in that crunched like fight, flight, or freeze or fawn mode, when you
Oh,
like let yourself wander. Yeah.
absolutely. Okay, so I kind of started that line of questioning because I wanted people to understand the environment that you came from and how that is important to what you are doing now. In other words, you didn't just, date somebody who was a left brain analytical person, or you didn't just have some friends that were like that. Like, you worked in it, you were immersed in it 24/7 for a lot of years. If anybody understands how many years it takes to get a PhD and then working in it, it's just you eat, sleep, and breathe it for, decades of your life. So you have a lot of experience in interacting with men who are in this space. And that's what I really wanted to establish here in the beginning.
Thank you.
So now I want to go in a slightly different direction, which is having been in that environment yourself. I'm wondering if you were struggling with, say, relational intelligence or relationships, or if there was any sort of because you're working in relationships now and you've learned a lot from your experience. Does some of that come from your personal struggles in this area?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So not only was I around like really left-brained men, I was that person too. I was cut off from the neck down and wedded to logic, and I dismissed emotions or the body as uncouth, as distractions, as weak. I mean, I came from a very extreme sort of culture in West Texas that really just prioritized logic and reason, and saw anything associated with women as inferior. So I really tried to make myself into being more like a man so that I could be respected and do cool studies in life instead of just having to stay home. And what that did was I never had a single class in how to be a healthy human in my entire academic career. Nothing about how to manage my emotions, how to communicate well, how to have pleasure or great sex. Zero education. And it really, really hurt me. I was married to this man who, my ex is a therapist, and I'm grateful to him for so many things. And I thought I just had this unconscious narrative in my head of, this is the role he's going to play, this is the role I'm going to play, and I'm going to control everything to make it that way. But all I knew how to do was be really defensive with him. And I didn't know how to relax, surrender, let go, and be messy in sex or have pleasure. And life was very efficient. It had to all be like clockwork, like this maximum efficiency, effectiveness, like that was the goal of life. And I had a lot of anxiety and anger in me, but I didn't know what to do about them. I was ashamed of it. And so I was drinking way too much to cover it up and just numbing out. So that sort of scenario where all of those things are happening is unsustainable. You will burn out, and I did.
Yeah, that is not surprising at all. And thank you for sharing that, because, okay, so that was your experience as a female, but I think that a lot of really left brain analytical men experience a similar thing, right?
Yes. Yes. And we know this from people, even business coaches who do research in this area. They say they've seen so many men in leadership become very powerful, but then feel hollow and unsatisfied and disconnected and lonely in their personal lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's that's a lot of the clientele that used to show up to work with my wife, was these people, these men who were very successful, sometimes very powerful, every once in a while actually very famous. But they were absolutely struggling with relational intelligence, with just relationships in general. A lot of them were struggling to, even get an erection in the
Yep.
bedroom. So, this, if taken too far, right, this type of lifestyle and way of being can really have some detrimental effects.
Yeah.
So that, of course, then leads me to the next question is like, okay, so you hit burnout mode, right? Where did you go after that?
Yep. So after going to Burning Man a bunch of years, I know it might sound unbelievable, but it's really true. It was there. I mean, combined with a lot of other things that I was doing in the San Francisco Bay Area to push my boundaries, to push my beliefs about what was possible. I had an experience there of being in an authentic relating community where nobody cared about my pedigree or my accomplishments or anything. They cared about who I was in the moment and how available I was to have like a heart connection. And it just blew me away. And after that, I went back to my cubicle and my commute and looked around, and I was like, this cannot be my life. And I was able to finally hear my heart saying, you're not supposed to be doing this. And it was, I felt a lot of shame because like I had a 10-year academic career at that point, and I was like, wait, I can't just throw this all away and walk away. Oh my gosh, my family will be angry. What am I going to do? How am I going to make money? But I knew that something else was calling me. So fortunately, I had my husband with me at the time, and he came with me, and I went on a trip to start to explore things. We traveled across the whole world for a year, and I on purpose did things that I would have been closed or a no to or thought were dumb or too touchy-feely or whatever.
Such as?
Well, I mean, one of the things I did was I lived on a permaculture farm in northern Thailand where I like was in the mud pit every day making these clay bricks to build natural houses. It's really like not very efficient. Well, in some ways to build things that way. I got my hands dirty and just did something really simple in the earth. I also did, I think it was a 2-week long contact improvisation dance trip across the country of Georgia. So contact improvisation dance was the furthest thing from my comfort zone I had ever discovered. There's no steps, there's no logic. You're just pressed up against a stranger's body and being present in the moment and feeling, how do you want to move together? Insanely confronting. I would spend a lot of the time crying in the corner. Yes. And I did, ayahuasca in Peru with a therapist and tried to just really let go and understand what else is out there. And then I ended up doing some Tantra workshops at a Tantra school, which I thought I would hate because I was like, I'm not interested in gender binary. I had been in the queer community in San Francisco, and also they had some very questionable claims that were very unscientific.
Oh, we must hear more about this.
Oh no, it was bad. Well, I mean, there were some good things there and there's some bad things there. They were pushing things like that the germ theory was a hoax or something, really weird stuff like that that comes along with these spiritual communities sometimes, and some gender essentialism and yeah, it was some bad stuff, but there was some good stuff too. And I think I want to make sure that I'm answering your question because I lost the question you asked.
That was great. What we were really getting at there was, okay, you were in this hardcore science, field for a long time, and you burn out because it's not serving you, not just as a woman, but also just as a person, as a human being, right? And so you burn out from it. And then it's like, okay, that's what we call rock bottom, right? And then it's like, it's always interesting to know, where does somebody go when they hit rock bottom? What happens next? And so you did a good job of answering that. You traveled the world, you went and did things that you never thought you would do. You probably never pictured yourself being in a mud pit, making mud bricks. Or maybe in a tantra, potentially free love type community place.
Right.
So these are things that you did to, I would say, not only push your boundaries, but maybe sort of reconnect with parts of yourself that had been suppressed for a long time. Would that be accurate to say?
Yeah, I didn't know I was doing that though. Right.
But essentially that's what you did, right? Because you were shutting down that part of yourself in order to be that robot that they wanted you to be in the science world. So that's just a very interesting journey. And so, now we got to take it from, okay, that was the journey to sort of get you to where you are now. What did you learn from that you then realized, like, oh, I need to go out there and teach other couples or men or, people, like, what were some of the key things you learned that you thought you really need to teach to others?
I would say there were three key things I learned, and it really lit a fire under my ass to do this work. So the first thing I learned was I became aware of how strongly I was judging anything associated with women as weak or inferior. That I had, yeah, really deeply internalized that. And I said, wait a minute. What if I decided that all of those aspects of me were actually wise and equally deserving of respect? I mean, in Tantra, we understand the world as energy, and emotions are just another form of energy, just like thoughts, for example. And they actually work together. So what happened was I was catapulted into connection with my body and my sexuality, and also learned to recognize my emotions and work with them instead of suppressing them. And for the first time in my life, I felt respected because of my feminine qualities, not in spite of them. And actually, when I reconnected to my power and my full humanity, I found I was harassed way less.
Interesting.
So that was the first thing, was like connecting to my wholeness and feeling the power.
Okay,
Yes?
wait, we got to pause you there. So please don't
Okay.
forget the other two, but we got to talk about that a little bit here.
Yeah.
Okay, so I find that really fascinating, right? So what's interesting is as we're having this discussion, there's so much value in this episode for women who are listening, even though we kind of titled it towards like men. There is a ton of value here for women listening to this. You needed to actually reconnect with your body and your sexuality, and that was one of the pieces that was really missing. And this is something, whether you're a woman or a man, this is something that when I started this episode by saying, my wife had noticed that she had worked with a lot of men who were in this sort of heady space, and that was one of the key components to helping them fix their problems, was getting them back in their bodies. Literally out of being stuck up here in the head all the time. Because when you're up here and you're always in those heady realms, right? You're not connected to your physical body. If you're not connected to your physical body, then you're obviously not connected to your sex, right? And we wonder why men are experiencing erectile dysfunction and premature ejaculation and all these sexual problems that they have, because they're literally not in their bodies. They can't feel themselves. They can't feel what their body is doing when they're having sex, and they have no control over it whatsoever.
Yeah, absolutely. And you need really strong things like a lot of porn or a lot of drugs to like get you into your body.
Yep.
The thing is, if you're like me, if you're a very smart left brain person and you're a leader, it's really hard to let yourself connect, because I had a lot of fears about that would mean I would never be successful, I would be distracted, I would be weak. It felt shameful and like, oh, and embarrassing even. Like there was a very strong no, don't go there.
Yeah, that's kind of sad. The flip side to this is what I said a minute ago, which is there's so much value in this for women too. Because I love that piece that you shared, that you basically did a 180-degree reframe of all the things that I thought that were weakness because I'm a woman, or not good enough because I'm a woman. I suddenly realized actually were my strengths and my superpowers, and the things that actually made me, who and what I am. That is a really huge, huge change. I mean, and I think a lot of women are exactly where you were before. And so
Yeah.
I would love for the women listening to this to really hear that message and realize that you can flip that around. If you can learn to see the aspects of being a woman as actually your superpowers, as opposed to being some sort of a weakness.
Yes. And embarrassingly, I would never have believed it or let myself go there, but that was the gift of non-dual tantric metaphysics. That was what did it for me. I needed to understand that there was a serious, sophisticated, long-standing tradition in human history that really fundamentally saw my feminine qualities as respectful and complementary as things associated with men. And, the tantric non-dual metaphysics were written about before our modern culture of capitalism. And there is this beautiful interplay of consciousness and energy of Shiva and Shakti. And it was through reading and understanding that this was very real and very intellectual and very refined, and knowing that there were very smart people who come before me that put this down. I needed that. I needed to know that as a academic, that existed in the world. And then I was like, oh, I'm going to try this.
So that's another great point that you just brought up that I hope people take away from this episode, is that, again, we titled it How Left Brain Analytical Men Can Understand Women in Relationships, but there are also women who are in relationships with these left brain analytical men, right? And so the point I want to sort of reiterate here is like, how do you get to them? How do you get into their brain and get them to realize that there is something else other than just hardcore science, analytical, business, whatever, right? And so for you, what it took was, if somebody had come to you, this is the way Tantra happens for most people. It's like totally informal, right? It's like they don't even give you a book. They're just like, come, let me show you my tantric practices, right? And you're like, oh, ew, God.
Get away!
Exactly, right? Unfortunately, that's a lot of people's, first introduction to Tantra. But instead, approaching it from here is a thousands of years old tradition where so many generations have tried these things and refined them over time. And there is something, science doesn't completely discount the experience of people. Now they won't base everything on that because they want to do experiments to back up the experience of people. But if you've got people over 1,000 years practicing something and all having the same experience, that's a pretty solid body of evidence, wouldn't you say?
Yes.
So, anyway, the point is here, it's like, how do you get to somebody who's really stuck in their head? Maybe try approaching things from that point of view. Like, don't just go, hey, I've got this crazy tantric practice that I want to do that's going to make us orgasm 50 times, right? Like, say, hey, how about we explore this, 1,000-year-old tradition and let's see what they have managed to discover over time, right? So appealing to that left brainness, and then using that to bring them around maybe over a little bit into the right brain side.
Yeah, exactly. And I approached it from more a hatha yoga point of view, which is a very sort of upright, cleaner practice. And so first they gave me the intellectual framework, and I checked it out myself in the old tantras and the old books written in Sanskrit. And then I did this practice, a ritual that lasted an hour, and I built up to it over the course of a week. But it was a very simple ritual. It wasn't like about sex or any weirdness, of just like opening and allowing and being in full presence with different men. And after that ritual, something clicked in me. I just had the felt sense experience of like reconnection to my body and my power. And it was undeniable. It was really, a voice said, where have you been? I've been waiting for you your whole life. So it was both the intellectual, and then just, I couldn't argue with the embodied experience, this like moment of awakening that happened. So that's how I did it.
So the intellectual piece is sort of the gateway, right? That's what allows you to even start the experiment. But then inevitably, something happens that you can't really necessarily explain intellectually, but you can feel and and you're just like, oh, that's what they were talking about, right?
Yes.
So yeah, the intellectual can lead you into the more sort of esoteric, or there are experiences that we have that we just can't explain through science, and that's the reality.
And I love that.
Yeah, I have a theory of, and I won't go too deep into it, but this is sort of theory of spirituality, how people start out. And it's like, a lot of people start out because they're given a religion, right? And that's just what happens with their family. And then if they continue on down the journey and they do some investigation, they start to see the inconsistencies, the incongruencies in their religion that they were given. So then they end up going, it's all nonsense and I'm an atheist, right? And then if they keep going down that path, they start to experience things that atheism can't explain, but their religion didn't explain, but science can't explain. And then they end up coming around to what is often termed, well, I'm spiritual. I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. It's because you know there's something bigger, but you can't explain what it is, and the other frameworks don't fit. So it's kind of like that when you're talking about Tantra and what happens when you have one of those awakening moments. You're like, there's something else there that I can't really describe or quantify. There's no scientific experiment that proves this, but I feel it and I know it.
Exactly. So well said. And I'll say one other thing that helps transition, just very simply, is just experiment. Because what you've been doing so far is probably feeling frustrating and you're not getting the sex you want and it's hard and it's stressful. All I did was after this, I started living this way by bringing in the emotional and the body component and relating to people that way. Guess what? My life got less stressful. The friends around me were way more awesome. It was so much easier to socialize. My work got pleasurable even, and I became more successful. So I was like, there's no question.
Best sales pitch ever right there. I actually, I just did an episode. I think it's the one that is live as we're recording this. So it's one that was a few weeks ago when this actually airs. But the basic gist of it was, how problems in your sex life can affect every other area of your life, right? And so it's that basic idea that, so here, it's not so much you were specifically seeking to solve problems in your sex life, but you were looking for something else outside of, that hardcore scientific world. And when you found that, and sex was a component of it, you started to notice that it actually came around full circle back into the work part of the world and shifted that too, right? It's because these things aren't separate, right? They're all parts of who we are. And so when we awaken and enliven one part, we'll see other parts start to light up as well.
Yeah, my teacher likes to say how you act in the bedroom is how you act in any room.
Yeah, absolutely. Explains a lot of my behavior in public.
Mine too.
All right. We're a little bit past when I need to take a break. So I want to take a break and then I want to come back because there's still two more things that you wanted to share. So let me take a quick break. Men, are you tired of falling short both in the bedroom and in your relationship? Do you want your woman to respect you and crave your cock? Do you want to be the man she secretly brags about to all her friends? What if you could become this man? What if you could not only master your masculine sexuality, but also be the dream man who shows up for his woman in all the ways she desires? What if you could become so irresistible that she becomes addicted to you? If you're ready to become that man, then check out my Become the Man of Your and Her Dreams coaching program by going to kevinandceline.com/go/man of her dreams. That's kevinandceline.com/go/man of her dreams. All one word. Don't worry about the long link. It is in the description. All you got to do is click on it. Okay. So I asked you if there were any things that you learned from this journey, and you said there were 3. We covered 1 so far. So what are the other 2?
Okay, so these are big. And by the way, I'm so appreciating your direction and you're just keeping us on track. It's like, oh, I love this.
You're welcome.
Yeah. So the second thing that I learned was secrets about what is possible for men sexually that I had never heard of before, and I wouldn't have believed if I had heard it. Now, it may be a little controversial, although I'm sure you've probably talked about this before, but what I learned was that through becoming more embodied and doing energy work, that men can choose to have different kinds of orgasms and can have multiple orgasms. And when I, had my tantric lover and I witnessed him do this, and I also witnessed how he held space for me, it checkmated my entire experience of sex. And instead of just performing to please him or running a script unconsciously or being afraid, and trying to make it all go nice and control it, he wouldn't let me. And he was like, I'm not here to push this to my end because I may or may not choose to ejaculate. I'm having orgasms already over here. I want you to go as deep into your pleasure as possible, and I'm going to sit here until you let go.
Yes, yes, yes. I'm so glad you had that experience with a man.
It was revolutionary. It changed my entire life. And so witnessing how men can study sex and hold space and have so much pleasure in their bodies, I was like, what the fucking fuck? Nobody told. I know, it's a very technical term. And I became so passionate about this. It's really radical because it takes sex out of the for procreation only bucket and puts it into this whole other realm of a playground where you can really use it as a spiritual experience. Well, that's a whole other can of worms. But even just having this freedom and flexibility to not have linear sex where it's foreplay, penetration, orgasm, then you go to sleep, to have this whole other experience. And it was like nerd sex. I got to, because I would help my lover figure out how turned on he was. And I wanted to help him have energy orgasms and not ejaculate before he wanted to. So I'd be like, what number are you at? What number are you at? What do I need to do? And I just loved it. I loved the permission to be awkward, have nerdy sex, and really get into the technical details of our pleasure and be really aware of it and talk to each other. It changed my whole life. I knew that it would change the life of a lot of men. Because also when he studied sex this minutely, he studied, what do you do if you're having challenges with erections and if you're finishing sooner than you want to, or what if you can't finish at all? So, we were in this community where I could openly talk about all of that. So that's point 2.
That's huge. So, the name of this podcast, the Love Lab podcast, the reason why that came about is because my wife and I would do exactly what you were just describing. We would geek out over how did you do that? And what did that feel like in your body? And then, what happened then? And then we would just totally geek out on that. And so we used to say that our bedroom was our lab, right? Hence, that's where the name, one day when we were started, I'm like, it's the Love Lab, right?
Yes. And that's why I decided too. I was like, why can't I study sex the way I studied chemistry? Why is it laudable to study molecular sex, connections between molecules, but shameful to study human sex? I was like, this is so crazy. I'm going to change this.
It is crazy. There are some reasons for that, but that's a whole other show.
Yeah.
It's mostly about disempowering humans, but that's a whole other topic. I do want to come back a little bit to something else that you were sharing in there, which is that, okay, so for me, from my point of view as a man, so I recently just turned 50, so I've been around a while now.
Wow.
Thank you. And having studied Tantra and, doing this work for a living, my own sexuality has evolved to the point where, for me, when I make love to a woman, the best part for me is feeling the unbelievably powerful energy that she generates as she goes through her multiple orgasmic waves over however long a period of time that is. So in other words, most men approach sex from the point of view that the ultimate destination is an ejaculation, right?
Yeah.
And from that point of view, they don't really care how long it lasts as long as they get to the ejaculation. I'm always trying to help men reframe that and realize the ejaculation actually isn't the ultimate goal. In fact, it's a very short and fleeting moment, and you could experience hundreds of times more pleasure if you could take a woman far enough along this journey for her to have really massive rolling multiple, not just clitoral, but G-spot and cervical orgasms. And for me, when my woman literally blasts off into a long rolling cervical orgasm, I equate it to it's like sticking your penis in an electrical socket. It's like you remember the old Metallica album Ride the Lightning, right? That's what it's like. You're just like, wah, right? To me, there's no better experience in lovemaking than that, right? My own ejaculation is like, okay, that was cool, but not like that. that, right? So you gotta, I
Right.
challenge both men and women to reframe the way they look at sex and realize just how powerful that experience can be for both men and women. Obviously, for most women, you know, we know about the studies that show that the average man, you know, it lasts anywhere from 3 to 5 minutes or 5 to 7 minutes. And we know the average woman takes at least 20 to 30 minutes to get, you know, close to her orgasm, sometimes longer than that. So women
Yeah.
for a long time have been in very unfulfilling sexual relationships because their partners were never able to take them to those places that they are capable of going if they have somebody that can stay there with them, right? So it's kind of revolutionary for both men and women. Like when a woman finally has a partner who can go there and then actually allows herself to go there,
Yeah.
which that'll probably take a while because she's never even had the opportunity. So she's like, I don't know if I can, I don't know. This is kind of scary, right?
Yeah. I do want to say most of the men I work with actually are in a different boat where they're like, I'm ready. I want to do this. I'm so ready to go deep and I don't care. My ejaculation is great, but it's not the goal. But what they find is that their woman is closed to it. And I was close to it, from purity culture, religious indoctrination, shame, or maybe just not being comfortable getting messy and being afraid that we don't look as good as we could for him. Also, there was another one in there, but it went away. But there's a lot of stuff that can come up. So it's hard too for women to believe that this is something that's good. Oh yeah, indoctrination that really sex is only for procreation and it's kind of weird if you like really enjoy it. So a lot of things prevent it. Even I know there's a lot of men out there that are amazing lovers and really care and are so ready to help a woman go deeper, but we have our own stuff that prevents it as well.
Well, that is definitely true. Okay, so let's move on to number three as we're getting close to the end of the show here.
All right. Okay. So, point number three was, well, the third thing that happened was I really experienced how powerful it is to have really great sex. And I always feel a little nervous when I say that because, we live in this world where that can be taken the wrong way. That's not an invitation when I say that. I'm sharing my experience, but it was like, oh my God, I had no idea that it was possible to feel this good in my body. And it and that it was how good it felt to just, well, I'm going to say this, be fucked into a puddle
Hmm.
and just totally dissolve my sense of who I was and fully let go of control and just merge into that space of oneness and fully trusting someone. And when I had access to this space regularly, I mean, it's a really extraordinary, energetic, and mental space. And we can visit it for free anytime we want. But when I started incorporating this into my life, everything was better. I felt more powerful. The world was more vibrant. I was happier. And I thought, wow, this is a really powerful thing that has been taken from us. I
Absolutely.
and I have been furious ever since that we were not taught this, that this is our birthright as humans.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
those are the reasons that I faced down a whole ton of shame and decided to step out in this avant-garde field to be a relationship and intimacy guide and coach.
Well, I think the way that you've described it, if that doesn't light somebody up and get them interested in learning this stuff, I don't know what will. I love some of the words that you use because they're words that literally I've heard from the women in my lives. The dissolve into nothingness, or I've heard dissolve or yeah, like sort of dissolve into, a million points of light, or I've even I've even had one woman say that what did she say? Something along the lines of like, I couldn't get up off the floor because I was a quivering puddle of,
Yes.
whatever, like, and I'm
Can't
like,
walk.
yes. So I've heard those exact words that you're using from women in my life. And it's just like, that is what is possible. And then what effect does that have on your life? And, again, this is not like, oh, it's just, what women benefit from it, or it's just what men, it's like what we can both benefit from when we can have our relationships and our sex be like that. Like, wow, what does that create? And what does that allow us to then go out and create in the world?
Mm-hmm. Hell yeah.
All right. So we're pretty much at the end of the show. I had a ton of questions I didn't ask you, but it's totally okay. I think we accomplished what I really wanted to accomplish today, because we really talked about, what happens when we're too much in our heads, right? And what are the benefits of getting out of our head and getting into our body? And we talked about how using tools like sexuality and Tantra can help us do that, how that can help us get into our bodies, and how that can really ripple out through the rest of our lives in very positive ways. And so, if you are a man who's very stuck in his head, you're a woman who's very stuck in your head, you're dating somebody who's, or in a relationship with somebody who's really stuck in your head, there are tools and people out there that can help you get back into your body, experience a sexuality and an energy that flows through you that is so powerful that you may never even have experienced before in your life. And it could actually radically change your life, as it did for you. And it did for me too. I would say my evolution was a little slower over a longer period of time. Like, it wasn't like one breakthrough moment that was like, right? But it doesn't really matter. We all have our own journey. It doesn't matter how we get there. The point is that we embark on the journey, and we do eventually get there. So, all right, last thing, tell the listeners, if they're interested in working with you, where can they find out more about you and the work that you do?
Yeah, so definitely check out my website. It's bliss-science.com. And I have a program you can sign up for at any time. It's called the Tantric Man. It's a combination of one-on-one sessions with me and doing some of my on-demand programs, so you can feel confident, know how to develop full body energy orgasms, and all the yummy things that we talked about. It just takes 3 months. And so you can find that on my website under courses. You can also follow me on Instagram. I'm at bliss.science, and LinkedIn, Facebook as well.
Awesome. So I have one last question that I ask all the guests that come on my show. You should have no problem answering this one at all. And that is, what is your best sexual talent?
Oh. I mean, well, I think what I really love about what I was able to give myself permission to do through my tantric training, and I ended up spending over 4 years, in my trainings after that first aha moment. But it's really this ability to just let myself be a mess and make weird noises and just be like in my body and totally let go and surrendered to the pleasure.
Yep. There is, from a man's point of view, there is nothing better than when your woman just completely lets go, screams, makes noises, like whatever, and just, yeah, that is the best.
Yeah.
All right, Jessica, I want to thank you for coming on the show, sharing your wisdom.
Yes. It was truly a pleasure, Kevin. Thank you.
All right, everybody, that's all the time I have for this episode, and I will see you next week. I hope you liked this episode of the Love Lab podcast. If you enjoyed this show, subscribe, leave us a review, and share it with your friends. And for more free exclusive content, join me in the Passion Vault at kevinandceline.com/vault. That's kevinandceline.com/vault. Thanks for listening, and remember, as Celine used to say, you're amazing.